located in the heart of Michigan, in an old industrial town, right off the abandoned tracks of a once booming railroad system, sits an institution of higher learning, with deep ties to what was once the oldest monarchy in the world. Hillsdale College is committed to the study of the values that shaped not only the founding of America, but also the formation of Western civilization. They are taught through the past to transform the present and to guide the future. The throne of the Ethiopian Empire once traced its lineage 3,000 years to King Solomon and Queen Sheba. When Haile Selassie, the last emperor of that historic dynasty, was coronated, Hillsdale College was there. When that throne was toppled by a radical coup, Hillsdale College was there. And when its people sought refuge in the land of the free, Hillsdale College was there. Ross Adair, class of 1928, served as the U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia, and during his time as chief diplomat to the throne, he encouraged the child of an Ethiopian official to attend his alma mater. But just a few short years later, the communist revolution would overtake the emperor and prevent that student from returning home to Ethiopia, out of fear for her life. Professor Dr. Russell Kirk and his wife Annette, unaware that this student was sent to Hillsdale College by Adair, would take her in and her siblings and give them a home when they couldn't return to theirs. The Adairs then worked in their retirement to bring former Ethiopian government officials to their hometown of Fort Wayne, Indiana, as political refugees that were scheduled for execution. Unbeknownst to each other at that time, the Kirks and the Adairs served the same people. They did so with the same Christian love, and they were united by the spirit of the same college. This is the story of Hillsdale's role at the highest level of the world's oldest throne, and that monarchy's place at a rural Midwestern college.
Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, the King of Kings and the Lion of Judah, begins a series of state visits unaware of a plotted home to overthrow his rule.
Oh, another painful subject. Yes, our nation claims, our monarchs claim they are the direct descendant of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba.
The monarchy traces its lineage 3,000 years back, all the way to Solomon and Sheba. Among East African countries, it was certainly the wealthiest. One of the titles of the Ethiopian monarch is, of course, Conquering Lion of Judah. That's in the titular of the Ethiopian monarch. So they trace it back all the way, and Ethiopia has been officially Christian since the 3rd or 4th century AD. So it has a long lineage. They're very convinced of their Christian heritage, they're Coptic, and so that's sort of gone, that went all the way to the 20th century, to 1974.
We have been Christians. We are one of the first countries, besides Armenia, to embrace the Christian faith. And we have the oldest Orthodox faith that we practice.
Ethiopians are very proud because colonization never really takes hold. They never were colonized.
apparent Marxist government overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974 and jailed some members of his family.
I don't know if they saw what was coming.
It's fairly fast. They take over essentially the Ethiopian government, and then for a few weeks to months, basically, Haile Selassie is imprisoned in his own palace.
I think till the end he had faith, and he used to say, I hear these are our children that we educated, so they would not betray us that bad, and they did.
The emperor trusted his people. The monarchy was popular. It's interesting that most of the radicalization of Ethiopian society happens at what we would call kind of the middle or upper middle class level. It's not among the peasantry, it's not among noblemen, it's among kind of what you might call the technocrats of Ethiopian society. And so I think Haile Selassie has every reason to believe that his nobles are going to be loyal, that most of the soldiers that he would encounter day to day are going to be loyal, and that the peasantry was going to be loyal. So it was, of course, surprising to him that any segment of his society wanted to turn on him.
They murdered him a year later and then imprisoned most of the immediate family for a minimum of 18 years, I believe.
It was a clique of what we would call field grade and junior officers. These are the guys who are on the make. They're not generals. They don't have sort of the personal loyalty to the emperor. They're not the soldier on the battlefield who views the monarch as almost a sacred figure. These are the guys who are on the make, the guys who want to make their careers off of doing something grand. And they're the most likely to imbibe radical ideas, and they're the least loyal to the emperor. Famine and mismanagement has been probably the most noticeable effect of the communist coup. A lot of it's funded by the Soviet Union, a lot of it's funded by China. So yeah, Marxism in Africa kind of gets a big push in the 70s. You'll see flags like Mozambique and Angola both have these huge Marxist movements rise up at the same time. So yeah, there's definitely a push to make Africa Marxist, and that's one aspect of the Cold War. What's different is it hasn't really died down. There's still a lot of Marxist militias and at least Marxist parties that are active in Africa right up to our time.
The dark mark of the communist regime is still hovering over us. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. It's very sad.
I can assure you that there is no guest that we will receive in this country that will give a greater sense of livelier pride and satisfaction to the American people than your presence here today. Your Majesty, you're most welcome.
I think it makes me sort of take stock of how quickly things can change in our own country, and how much we take for granted social stability. The United States has been around for, 250 years, and Ethiopia had been around as a monarchy for 3,000. And so when I think about what happens in a place like Ethiopia, I just think it's a cautionary tale for how quickly we allow change to happen in our own country. And we shouldn't take for granted the fact that we enjoy freedoms precisely because we're committed to older things, older traditions. That which is new typically isn't always great.
Hillsdale is my home. Hillsdale is where you feel accepted. Service to fellow human being was stressed, is stressed, and unconditional love was given. Christian values at work. They don't only go to church on Sundays or talk about it, they practice it in action. That's what Hillsdale means to me.
Hillsdale's relationship with Ethiopia runs through Ross Adair, who graduated from Hillsdale College in 1928. Ross met his wife Marion while they were both students at Hillsdale. Adair served Indiana's 4th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives for 20 years, before being defeated for re-election in 1970. But in 1971, Adair was appointed as ambassador to Ethiopia.
My parents they lived during an interesting time. They were wonderful people, wonderful parents.
They both came from small towns, very small town, Hillsdale, and my dad from Albion, Indiana.
My mother grew up in Hillsdale. Her father was a jeweler. My parents both went there.
They complemented each other beautifully. He was a little more introverted, but had a path in mind. She was extroverted and loved people, and so their life path worked beautifully together.
My folks in politics knew a lot of people, of course, and lived in Washington. And my mother was very outgoing and loved to entertain and meet people, and she was just a outstanding person, as was my father. They were in different ways somewhat, but they complemented each other.
Dad had 4 careers. He was a lawyer. He served in World War II.
And as World War II happened, Pearl Harbor happened, my father enlisted in the Army and was into service for 4 or 5 years, came back after the end of the war. He was in the Army in Germany, served in Germany.
And then he came back and went back to his law practice and thought he would run for Congress, although there was some opposition because folks said you're not very well known. Be hard for you to win. You're running against an incumbent Democrat. So he ran, worked hard, and won. 20 years in Congress, and after that.
When my dad was defeated for Congress,
President Nixon was looking for somebody to go to Ethiopia. Dad was a logical and perfect choice.
He was given that position. He could have had several others that were offered to him by the president, but chose that one.
Politics is either a vicious taskmaster or a rewarding adventure. Over 20 years in Washington had been the latter. Now, as we said farewell to many wonderful people who through the years had become dear friends, we knew we were closing a door on that segment of our lives. We also believe that when the Lord closes one door, he does so because he has plans for opening another. We wondered with much expectation what door God would open for us next. Little did we dream that Ross would one day become the ambassador to Ethiopia. Marion Adair, Window on Washington.
They loved their time there, and they loved the people, and they loved the country, and have made lifelong contacts with those folks.
We did have opportunities to meet some of the royal family. As a matter of fact, my mother started a prayer breakfast with the help of some other of the princesses.
They used to meet once a month and do prayer breakfast with the immediate royal family and the ambassadors' wives in Ethiopia.
And then when part of the royal family had to leave the country and came to Washington, Mother entertained them at her apartment. So there was a friendship there that was sustained for a number of years.
Well, they loved them, I think. I mean, that's what I believe. Now, I'm not behind closed doors listening to the bad things they say about my parents, but I don't think there were many bad things they could say. My mother was such an outreaching person that just loved everybody and would talk to them and take them under her wing. And she, as you read in the book, would start events at the embassy. The embassy, I'm sure, was always kind of out there and what's behind the fence kind of thing that people would ask. But she opened the doors, let people in, brought them in, taught them to do crafts, had prayer meetings with them. You know, they'd have Bible study and things like that for people. And she would not just do it for a particular group of people. She would do it for everybody.
The Adairs were very good friends of my parents. My mom and Mrs. Adair were really, really, really good friends. I used to go visit her at the embassy, and whenever she got a package of goodies from the States, and especially she loved chocolate chip cookies, and she got me hooked on chocolate chip cookies. She was the most loving human being I believe I was blessed to have known in my life.
I've heard of and about Miss Stella of a long time. She was a significant person in my parents' lives.
They did a lot of service for the people, to the people. She kept them busy by introducing them to different kind of crafts. We used to have, and I'm sure we still do, wonderful peacock eggs that nobody ever cared to do anything with. And by the time she left, you could not even get one. You couldn't buy one because she made it so popular. And when it was time for me to go to college, she and Mr. Adair suggested to try Hillsdale because it's a small, wonderful place where they met and fell in love.
I heard the shout, "Woody, it's for you!" I was surprised when a male voice said, "I'm Ross Adair, and I would like to take you to a movie at the Dawn Theater. How about this weekend?" I said, "Ross Adair? Do I know you?" His response didn't help when he said, "No, we haven't met, but we pass on Central Hall steps each day when we go to our classes." Still struggling for a clue, I asked the question that might have ended in disaster. "What do you look like?" He answered, "I'm tall, dark, and handsome." The comments continued until one finally said, "He's a really neat guy." I knew then that I'd made a huge mistake and had much to learn about people on campus. We danced silently for a short time. Then I pulled back. I looked into his face and said, "I was turned off when you told me that you were tall, dark, and handsome. That's why I refused the date." He slowed the pace, stiffened, and exclaimed, "I never said that to you. My roommate, Doc Rose, was trying to set us up and made that call. All he told me was that you refused." From then on, our relationship began to blossom. We enjoyed a college romance and wonderful years of courtship. We were in love and were confident that eventually we would marry. Marian Adair, Window on Washington.
I was honored to have been accepted, and I came to Hillsdale.
Miss Stella had never seen snow, and you can imagine being here in the middle of snow.
Driving and seeing cows and stuff, because it's a small country, was a shock to me. Because when you're a kid and you think of America, you're thinking of New York, DC, California, and they didn't look anything like Hillsdale. My experience, honestly, was incredible. I loved them, and I felt very loved and respected. I had so many wonderful professors who really took care of me.
She was brilliant, so she never really needed me as a teacher. I mainly was working with the students whose English was not quite up to par.
She was a very interesting person to hear her background, hear her story of life, and she was very beautiful and carried that beauty with charm, without arrogance, just with charm. If there were a huge crowd in the room, you would pick her out as somebody that must be very interesting and that you would like to get to know.
Everybody was very nice to me.
Miss Stella was just beautiful and elegant lady, and she was part of the first international fair that we had. She was probably that's the most beautiful exhibit we've ever seen of her belongings, really. And she showed a wonderful video on Ethiopia one time. I mean, it was very eye-opening to me because I had no idea what the country looked like. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful country. Very mountainous, very, very rich. I mean, of course, it's got rich history too, but
it was wonderful. And of course, the friendships you build in the student body on campus that's part of my life. I always said I will redo 10 times over if I had the chance. I've made lifelong friends.
Really lovely person that had that came from a fabulously interesting country. And so we just talked about what were her goals, what was her hope, and did she think she would go back to Ethiopia or would she stay here? And of course that kind of changed.
It was a very, very hard time.
That was the nightmare part of my life. About 6 months after I came here, our life fell apart. Change was desired, yet none of us could predict what happened. The communists took over, and life as we know it, you could say, ceased.
En route home, just 1 week later, we learned of the first insurrection in Ethiopia. It came as a shock, for there was no indication of trouble when we left. Ross had often predicted there would be a power struggle after the emperor's death, because he had not trained anyone to take his place. But this seemed impossible while he was still living. How did it happen? Marian Adair, Window on Washington.
You know, what we think of Ethiopia now as being a very poor country with not able to feed itself and take care of its own. Well, back in the day, it was known as the breadbasket of Africa. But when the communists took over, Mengistu killed Haile Selassie a couple of years later. They tore apart the people, and they did it for control, of course, to break up family units and break up other units so that they couldn't work together against the communists.
This was a terrible, terrible time for Estella.
My immediate younger sister was taken, like every other student her age, was sent away to teach in the countryside. My parents lost everything. I mean, everything. The property they owned, everything. And my mom was a senator. She, of course, lost her job. A few years later, my father would be imprisoned. A lot of our families, in about a year's time, I believe, I can't remember now, year's time or less than a year, were murdered. They start killing people left and right. And it was very uncertain. And each day became worse than it was yesterday. And I think in my senior year, my sister had come back and was in the city, and my parents were very concerned about her. And one night, on the eve of May 1st, they were a bunch of students, not a bunch, a lot of students went out to demonstrate against the communist government. And I believe anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 kids were murdered. And she was one of them. And that was hell on earth.
I just know how she suffered.
After she was killed, somehow somebody recognized her. I don't know. Anyway, they called my dad. He ran there in the morning, and it gave him strength in a most bizarre way. There were bodies just piled up one on top of the other. So I said, okay, God give it, God take it. And watching all these bodies, yes, I'm devastated, but you just have to go on. Anyway, I'm telling you this story because there were, I think, about maximum 5, if not 3 people were able to get the body of their child to bury and have a closure, while the rest would not. They didn't give it to them, and they don't know where they buried them. Also, there are a lot of kids who were put in prison and disappeared, which I'm sure are murdered. So we have a lot of family members who have no closure, who have no clue what happened to them. So there used to be a lot of mass graves. And the killing of youth continued for a long time.
Can you imagine living away from home, all these problems? And
it was a very, very, very fearful time.
it was a terrible time to be away from your family in another country when your country's going through turbulence.
And I would like to say I had extreme, unbelievable support from all the people that were around in Hillsdale. It's still difficult to talk about. It changed our lives. And then my father was imprisoned. And that was very difficult. So I come from a family of 7, now 6, because she's gone and I was the oldest. And it was a very rough time, and they were very worried for the next 2 under her.
I just got to know Mistella better because the need was greater.
That was a very difficult time because what might have been her dream, I don't know for a fact that her dream was to go back home and do something important, but all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under her, and so she had to make her way some other way.
Mistella McConan's siblings, who were 15 and 16 years old, they were Sahala, the young man, and Tamara, the young woman. They came to stay with us in 1975 at the time of the revolution in Ethiopia, in which their college-age sister was killed. And so the parents wanted to get their 2 teenagers out of the country. Russell was teaching at Hillsdale at the time. He taught there between 1971 and 1978 and knew Mistella. And she knew that we had other refugees. And so she asked him if he would house her siblings.
The Kirks, Dr. and Mrs. Kirk, decided to sponsor them.
So they came and stayed with us about 3 years. Now, how they got out of the country is kind of an interesting tale. The father wanted to get them out as soon as possible, and it's hard to imagine, but they were still having pilgrimages to the Holy Land from Ethiopia. And the father was the secular head of the Ethiopian Church, is my understanding. I'm not exactly sure that title would be. So he was able to get them on a plane along with other pilgrims to go to Israel. And then from Israel, they were able to take a flight to the United States and ultimately to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where Mistella picked them up. And actually, she might have picked them up in Detroit. But at any rate, she brought them here that night. And I'll just never forget it because it was midnight. And here's these 2 young teenagers just suddenly being whisked from Ethiopia to Makasta, the village of 400 people in the middle of Michigan. And it was, as I say, midnight, and Mistella had class the next day. So she said, well, here they are. And I was surprised. I thought she was going to stay the night, but she had to get back for class and being a dutiful student. And so there they were, sitting in my kitchen having hot chocolate on a night in 1975. That was quite a beginning for them. And I can't imagine what they thought of it. You'd have to ask them, I suppose. But from my point of view, it was wonderful to have them here. They were pleasant and charming and very mannerly young teens.
So kindness, when I think of Hillsdale and my experience, I think of generosity and kindness. They were our haven. And I'm surprised it's still this emotional. It is. I'm sorry.
So at the time they were here, our lively 4 daughters and the many students that were always here studying under Russell, they were kept occupied and entertained by all these people. There was always a flow of traffic in our house. And we always had events and festivities celebrating something. And if there wasn't something to celebrate, we would decide to celebrate anyway. And so they had many adventures to look forward to, such as attending our local high school, which was quite a shock for them in the middle of nowhere. Out here, we always talk about being from Lake Wobegon. And they made many friends there. And so they were kept pretty busy.
And there were Dr. and Mrs. Kirk kept on sponsoring the others. The last one, I think, yeah. And then in between, all of us ended up, all the girls graduated from Hillsdale. That's a success story. They're all doing very well in life. One worked as a social worker for a long time in California and retired. The other one works in a big, I believe, oil company in Texas, and one works at a good, big organization in the metropolitan area in DC.
And you ask, well, why did we decide to take in refugees? What motivated us to open a home to them? And well, charity has always been an important Christian act, and we felt that it was good for our daughters to share with others, to teach them to share, and to hear the stories of other teens. So hopefully that they would have a greater sense of gratitude for all that they had and for living in this country.
So the Kirks, because of us, took in some more Ethiopian students, gave them shelter and direction, and it was a wonderful, loving experience.
So the refugees we took in at that time were all from countries with communist dictators. We had a family from Vietnam at the same time that the Ethiopians were here. So we had the Vietnamese, the Polish, the Yugoslavians, and on occasion the Cambodians were coming too.
To me, the Kirks were amazing people too. They opened up their homes to hobos and unwed mothers, and was just, and you felt at home.
So I think it was a very good experience, and my daughters in retrospect have said that it was very good. We are living in a little village where essentially everybody is more or less the same, and they're just good country Americans. And so this added quite a bit of diversity to the village and to our family, and it was a very good experience that we had with them.
They just embraced me and accepted me and loved me, and I am very grateful.
It's an amazing story about the Adairs. I've heard of them from the McConans quite often. They just revered them because of the wonderful relationship that they had with them when they were in Ethiopia.
Going back to Mrs. Adair, during that time, Mrs. Adair, I am sure, sponsored almost all the Ethiopian immigrants from Ethiopia to Fort Wayne.
I was aware that Mr. Adair was an alum who had been, I believe, an ambassador to Ethiopia. And when the regime in Ethiopia fell, I was aware that he had helped a number of families find asylum in the United States.
And subsequently, they helped so many Ethiopians at that time. So we're very grateful to them for all of that.
And they changed a lot of people's lives for the better.
They were people that we all heard about because of their kindness and how much they helped after he left there.
And everybody has had a good life because of them, and were sheltered from the horrible times in our country.
He understood the people, and they appreciated that so much, because a lot of times diplomats don't always really relate to the people as such and keep their contacts with them. They're just there as functionaries, as diplomats temporarily. But the Adairs went on and really made it something that they helped the people that they served. And they served them very well for many years, even after they were out of their diplomatic positions.
In retrospect, I can think of no one who has contributed more to this area, or anyone who could possibly deserve this honor more than our mutual friend and mentor, E. Ross Adair. When Haile Selassie fell, roughly 1/3 of the Senate in Ethiopia came to Fort Wayne, Indiana, because Ross Adair meant to them America, and where freedom was. I and many others heard the stories of people's heads being chopped off and watching their kids die. Ross Adair represented the values, as do so many of our ambassadors, of America abroad, not only here in this chamber. Mark Souter, Indiana's 4th Congressional District, 2000. 1/3 of the Ethiopian Senate ended up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, because Ross Adair.
Because of Ross Adair.
Whoa, amazing. Isn't that incredible?
It's remarkable.
One person can do.
Mother and Dad said, come to Fort Wayne. And so they did.
Marta Gabriel Sadiq, the first female senator of Ethiopia, was one of those former government officials who accepted the Adair's invitation. She was a trusted advisor to Haile Selassie and warned him of fermenting radical ideas in the universities. And she was a dear friend of the ambassador and his wife. After the communist coup, Marta and her family were on the list to be executed.
Well, these people are the most remarkable people you're ever going to meet, probably. They came here. They had such an interesting life in Ethiopia, the first woman senator. And the communists took over, and they were on the kill list. They were sending the police out to get them, bring them back, and assassinate them. And they knew that. So they got out of their house one night when they found out that they were going to be assassinated with their kids, and escaped by fleeing to, I believe it was Kenya. And they did it by, I think, mostly walking or being driven off-road at night with, surreptitiously with no lights on and that sort of thing. And they travel at night and rest up by day. And the sheltered by the king is, the king, of course, is Christ. And they felt that Christ was with them and got them through that experience and to Kenya. And then from there, they came, I believe, to Greece or Germany, I'm not sure, and then came over here. My parents got them here.
After finding refuge in Fort Wayne, Indiana, because of Ross and Marion Adair, Marta's son, Michael, attended Hillsdale College, of course, upon the recommendation of the Adairs. In September of 1984, after Ross's death, Marion established the Adairs Endowment at Hillsdale College to assist more Ethiopian students in attending their alma mater, an endowment that still exists today. Michael was one of their scholarship recipients.
They loved Hillsdale. They told people to go, and, my own son went, so there you go.
It wouldn't surprise me that we would help families that were trying to escape that kind of oppression, and particularly if if they were to be killed. That's a lot of people to bring for one person to be responsible for that.
They did so many things for people their whole lives. It was unbelievable. I'll tell you a story. As I was growing up, we would have dinner around a table, and my dad would have next to his chair a telephone and a yellow pad, legal pad, and a pencil. Because every meal, and this it was remarkable, it just happened every time. This was dinner. The phone would ring and somebody would be calling, needing help. My dad was a veteran. He served on the Veterans Affairs Committee, among others, as well as Foreign Affairs. And veterans would call him desperately needing help. And he never turned down helping them. And every single meal was interrupted, and it was just expected, and it happened. And every time. And so they were always helping and caring people. And my mother was. They were very religious people, strong believers, let me say. And both of them. My mother wrote about her experiences in the book. But my father was a quieter Christian, let me say, but very, very strong in his faith as well. So helping people came very naturally. My dad was a lawyer, and I know lawyers get a lot of teasing. I'm a lawyer too, incidentally. And but you know, lawyers do help people, and he did, and always did. He was just a helping person, as was my mother.
They were fabulous people. They were just, and I would also say we could use them in Washington today.
Well, their kindness and caring and consideration for other people, they were just good to everybody. Didn't make any difference who or what or, you know, anything. They were just kind and good people, and I was amazed. You know, in politics today, there's a lot of discord, obviously. But back in the day, it wasn't that way when my dad was in Congress. People got along. They worked across the aisle with each other. A couple of my dad's best friends in Congress were Democrats, and he was a Republican.
My choice for the vice presidency is Senator Dan Quayle of Indiana.
Absolutely, Ross Adair. Ross Adair is a great man. He was a very decent, honorable man. He was in politics. In those days, it was tough, but it wasn't like it was today. There's just no similarities. And both he and Ed Roush were gentlemen, one Republican, one a Democrat. They handled their campaigns that way. He was very committed to the people of the 4th District, and then he went on to serve as an ambassador to Ethiopia. He and Nixon knew each other a little bit, and that's the reason he got the appointment.
Even here in the district, I can tell you I've had many people come in my office, my law office, and so many of them would come in and ask me about my parents, and a huge number would tell me a story about how he helped them, how he helped their family, and how he saved their son's life by getting him the medical care he needed when he was in the service or something. And and here it is, it's been close to 40 years since my dad died. People are still coming in talking to me about my dad. And I think and my mom too, of course, and I think it's just really a remarkable legacy.
Well, I didn't know all the particulars of what he did in regards to Ethiopia and the people of Ethiopia. One thing I know is that he was a hero over there. They made him some sort of a special, or had some special recognition of him. I forget exactly what it was, but I think he probably enjoyed that as much as he enjoyed being congressman, to tell you the truth.
If you'd ask what my mom would say, I know she would say the most important thing for her was her Christian faith, for sure. And my dad too. He wasn't as out front with it like my mother was, but he lived it. She did too. They both lived it. And so did Marta and Demi. You know, I think of them as the Mother Teresa of Ethiopia, really, I do. I mean, they are that giving, and they've given up their life like she did to take care of other people. Just amazing, the sacrifice they made for other people, and my parents did.
Well, he was the congressman from the 4th Congressional District for 20 years, and he was defeated by a guy named J. Everett Rausch. And Rausch served, I think, 3 terms in the 4th District, a total of 8 terms as a congressman from Indiana. So I ran against the guy that beat Ross Adair, Ed Rausch, and beat him. So Ross always had a very affection for me, because I was the one that dethroned Ed Rausch, who had defeated him. And he and Marion were delightful people. A good friend of mine's sister had married his son. So there was all sorts of close relationships. Then Marion Adair got my wife involved in some Washington events and groups after I was elected to the Congress in 1976.
And my special mom, like I said, I used to call Mrs. Adair, Mom Adair, and just loving, and weekends I would go home. This is so precious. And that lady, the ambassador's wife, you looked up to and respected, would make breakfast to wake me up. That was a shock. I mean, they're just humble. Wonderful period, wonderful time, great people. These are the people that shaped us.
Their friendship with each other and all of that is just, she thought, and I think too, would go a long way in this world today to bring more friendship and understanding. And that's what she wanted.
I asked her once, you have all these very dark-skinned people. What do you see when you look at them? And she said, I see eyes. And she just looked into their soul, and that was my mother. And from that, if you're looking into somebody's soul, a wonderful friendship develops. And so she, as you say, was greatly beloved because of this ability. And now at the same time, she was building friendships. My father was a great diplomat. You know, in Congress, he could talk with people on both sides of the aisle, and in Ethiopia, he could visit with everybody. So he was greatly respected as a diplomat, as a one who could talk across both sides of the aisle and get things done.
We've been longtime fans of the Adair family.
I thank him. I always, whenever I think of them, just like thinking of my experience in college and think of my country, bring tears. When I think of them, I only have joy in my heart. I love them very much. I carry their values at what I do. They changed my life for the better. They are the most important people in my life.
The 2001 dedication of the E. Ross Adair Federal Building and U.S. Courthouse in Fort Wayne, Indiana, was the epilogue to the life of a gentle man who lived to serve others. Ross Adair was a statesman who put the good of the country before personal consideration of any kind. Marion Adair, Window on Washington.
Hillsdale College's connection to the last emperor of the Ethiopian monarchy ends right where it began. Robert Moore, Hillsdale College class of 1921, while an assignment from National Geographic in 1930 captured the only color photographs of the coronation of Haile Selassie and the last coronation of the 3,000-year-old monarchy.
When he left and graduated from Hillsdale, the first place he traveled was to teach over in Siam. And then he came back, got married, and then went back over there. And that's where my father and my aunt were both born. This all started when he was teaching in Siam at the time. And he was just about to leave to come back to the United States, and had gotten a cable to go to the coronation.
Moore's writings and photographs from the coronation are preserved in the 1931 June issue of National Geographic, but his personal reflections live on in the Moore family, within the pages of his unpublished manuscript, The First Million Miles.
A tingle of excitement ran up my spine. I couldn't quite believe it as I read the words of the cable. Anxious, you make color photographs and write brief article coronations. Ethiopian king ceremonies begin November 1 and extended several weeks. Could you disembark and proceed to America? Minister Southard would be advised and your credentials sent to you his care. But it all started back at Hillsdale when he graduated, and one of his fraternity brothers, he was leaving on a trip, recommended him get a camera, take lots of pictures. You never know, maybe that'll become a career with the National Geographic. It's to Frank Eggleton, a fraternity brother of mine at Hillsdale College, Michigan, and later a professor of zoology at the University of Michigan, who, when I started off on my first journey to the Far East, said, "You must get a camera, Bob, and take pictures while you're in Siam. Send them to the National Geographic. Who knows, you might put a notch in the totem pole of success."
Temporarily deserting my family, I attended the coronation of Haile Selassie, King of Kings, Lion of the tribe of Judah, Emperor of Ethiopia, to do a short article and make the only natural color pictures of that colorful ceremony in November 1930. More courteous to me than to the present Italian visitors, the Emperor and Empress received me and posed especially in full coronation robes to complete my record of that spectacular event. Robert Moore, Hillsdale Alumni Magazine, May 1936.
The story we always heard in the family was that at that time you were traveling by boat, and that the boat was late. And I always heard he'd missed the coronation, and then he had to have the king get dressed again and convince him to reenact sort of the coronation when he took the pictures. But in his manuscript that he wrote, it was slightly different. He had made the coronation, he was there during the coronation, but was never able to get good pictures during the coronation. Photography was so different then, and the time people had to be still, and you had to be able to take kind of more of a stage picture, which he wasn't able to get during the coronation. So later on, he was able to get the king to come out and do that. And then even indoors, they weren't able to do the color photography, so they did that outside. He tried to get pictures during the coronation, and he talks about that. He says, lack of light and extreme slowness of color plates had precluded my making any photographs inside the cathedral. So I planned to secure my exposure at the outdoor appearance, but luck played otherwise. The only cloud to appear in the whole blue Ethiopian sky that morning drifted across the sun just after their majesties were seated. I waited anxiously for the shadow to pass. The moment it did, Lectern Burton Holmes stepped out of the line straight in front of my camera, and when he finally moved aside, my opportunity had passed. The single exposure I attempted proved a hopeless blur. It took several days to be able to get the arrangements made, to get the photograph made. And I think from what I heard in the story, when he got redressed to do the coronation pictures, the family story was all in it. It wasn't so much mentioned in the manuscript, but that it wasn't like, he was dressed in attire that wasn't like 5 minutes of getting dressed. It was quite the ordeal to get redressed in the entire dressings that they wore then. And so, even in the manuscript, he talks about it was, very limited to when he was going to get a chance to do that and to get the pictures made. So he was kind of pressed on the time to when he could do it. I think it took 4 or 5 days until they were able to get the arrangements made to do that, and then to get to the king to get redressed. So it wasn't like, casually throwing on a sports jacket and getting your picture taken. My cousin tells a story, and I had not heard this, that from their family side, he heard, he had to get the king to sit still for about 10 seconds for the color photography, and he was maybe a little tears with the king trying to get him to stay still.
Moore's special request, however, to have the emperor and other royal officials redress and pose for the exclusive color photos, led to Moore's lifelong relationship with His Majesty.
In October 1963, when Emperor Haile Selassie came to the United States, one of the places he asked to visit was the National Geographic Society headquarters. There, alongside recent photographs of him and his country, we were able to show him a few of the 33-year-old coronation plates that I had made. Yeah, I always heard that they had stayed connected over the years, and that, I'd heard that when he was here for a visit to the White House that my grandfather was invited. I don't know if that's true. It's not mentioned in the manuscript. But he does mention in the manuscript that in, I believe it was, like you said, 65, the king was visiting and wanted to go to the National Geographic and visit there because he remembers of those pictures. And then they were able to take the prints out and show him the prints that were done back then. So he had a chance to visit with him again, in the early 60s. And so that was on a visit. But it was interesting that he wanted specifically to go to the National Geographic. So
there are 4 little Moores, 2 born in Siam, 2 in Washington, when I was journeying to China and out to Australia. Sometimes they are sufficiently acquainted with me to call me Daddy. Robert Moore, Hillsdale Alumni Magazine, May 1936.
My dad always told me a story that was interesting because after the coronation, he was traveling back to the U.S. On a boat, and my dad learned to walk on the boat. And the story was that when they got to land, they no longer had the motion of the boat, and he had to kind of learn to walk all over again. So my dad was about 2 years old, I think, at that time, or a little bit younger than 2. So he, my aunt, grandmother, and all traveled back. And then he eventually took the pictures to the National Geographic, met with them, and then ultimately was hired by the National Geographic. But you could see that just the toll and the travel took on people. My dad always told me that sometimes my granddad would come back from some of the traveling that he did and weighing 30 pounds less. And it was, much more challenging. His book, he talks, about the 1,000,000 miles, and just, vastly different than traveling 1,000,000 miles today when you're going by boat, train, horseback, and every other way. Unfortunately, I'd love, had he lived longer, to be able to sit down and talk to him. I mean, he got to see and go to places and travel all over the world. So would have made interesting stories to sit down with him when I would have appreciated it.
If you live in some far corner of the world or travel to strange places someday, you will probably see my 6-foot figure stalking about, laden with cameras and notebooks. When old Hillsdale gave me a diploma in 1921 and told me that the world was before me, I took it very literally. Robert Moore, Hillsdale Alumni Magazine, May 1936.
It's just, I honestly don't have words how much that place means to me. It was my saving grace. All those people came my way are angels in disguise.
Well, I think Hillsdale had a lot to do with it too, because they do teach this understanding of extending yourself.
Ross and Marion served people, but does that reflect on Hillsdale College, and does that also reflect on just the people in the state of Indiana?
Well, he was, as I said, he was very Midwest. He had all the Midwest good qualities of integrity, hard work, decency. My dad, as you well know, is on the Board of Trustees of Hillsdale, so we've had a strong connection with Hillsdale for many years.
They value themselves, and above all, they value everyone. They pick up the pieces when you are falling apart and make sure you keep on going.
Decades of that we've had an experience of the hospitality that Hillsdale extends and the community that it is and that it forms even after they graduate.
After I graduated, I married and had have two kids. Now I also have 2 grandkids, and I raised them in Hillsdale, and they're doing very well. One lives in Maryland and one lives in New York, and they have wonderful Hillsdale values, decency and acceptance and service.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, yeah, Haile Selassie in the 20th century was one of the great sort of figures of endurance and defiance in the face of fascism. He's this relatively short man who nonetheless has this big imprint on what it means to be a figure that believes in tradition, believes in God, believes that he owes duty to something higher to himself. Ethiopia, at least under the Ethiopian monarchy, was something older and truer than a lot of what we think passes for modern success. Was it wealthy? No, it wasn't wealthy by our Western standards, but they believed in God, they believed in tradition, they believed in custom. And I think the fact that we at Hillsdale believe those things matter on some level is a unique tie. And so it's a really cool thing to have something like a 3,000-year-old monarchy have any passing connection to what we do here in southern Michigan.